Hey, welcome to my Lego Whippet tank part 2. I'm real excited for this video to be able to share it because this is where things get really interesting. I want to start by also saying thanks to anyone who went and watched part 1. I got quite a few views on it and I think it's pretty cool. So appreciate you if you went and watched, and you don't have to like it or share it or anything like that. But if people came and watched it, that's a pretty neat thing. But I'm even more excited to share this the second part because I think that it's going to be more interesting than the first. So for people who liked and watched the very first part and it ended up looking like how it does now, where it's sort of weird, and they still liked watching it, I think that that's really cool, because this one's going to be even better, and this is part 2, and I'm going to start putting on the main sides to the Whippet, and it's going to start actually looking more like the Whippet, which is going to be, in my opinion, is the most satisfying part. So this is it right now. I spent the last video kind of explaining sort of the history and service history a little bit of the British Whippet tank, but I wanted to talk a little bit more in this video about kind of how I made it. And it's stuff like this. So this thing I'm doing right now, where I'm putting this Technic pin through these sloped pieces, these curved slopes, were really, really fun to come up with, and try to come up with fun ways to make the very iconic shapes that ultimately are very easy to make out of armored steel and are not easy to make out of Lego. So it's kind of a fun way to go about it. But this bit is fun because it's actually not connected to the ground of the vehicle, and it's connected purely to the sides. Yeah, but the Whippet definitely has some weird shapes on it, like most armored land ships do, and Lego has a hard time kind of recreating that, so I have to get pretty creative. You will see more of that Technic pin technique, kind of to backwards connect things in the rest of this build, because it just was the most effective method to do it. It's one of my favorite methods. You'll see it here too. This is the engine part. I made serviceable engines, which is kind of fun. Again, features, that's kind of my deal. I love features. I think it adds so much to the build to have something that you can open up, or you can look at, or you can play with as well. So I did that here. I made 2 kind of different serviceable engine pieces, and I used these Technic pins to make studs on the opposite side of them, so they would pin long ways and kind of keep it all together, which is really, really cool. But yeah, it came together really in a satisfying way, with the shapes really kind of wrapping around and meeting nicely. And they're not exactly accurate. They're very, very close. They're as close as you can get with Lego in a lot of ways, because that's a tricky thing to do here. But this is another good example of it, just throwing those pins in these things. And because it's smooth on the bottom, it actually, like I said, doesn't connect to the base of it, but pins along the sides. But it makes some pretty clean angles. I tried using some actual slope pieces with the studs up for the front sort of part of this tank, and it just didn't do what it needed to do. It sort of needs to meet in like a perfect peak on the top, and I just not feeling that with some exposed studs. So I tried to keep as many studs off of this as I could, and tried to keep it look pretty, flat and clean. I did do a white stripe on there, and I left these sections kind of independent, as you can see, so that I could replace them and ultimately do the more iconic like red-white stripes that are on it, but I kind of just kept it sort of freeform and did it the way that I want to do. I actually wanted to do yellow accents, funnily enough. I ended up with a little bit of yellow on the inside, which was just for fun. But I wanted to do yellow paint on it. That might have been kind of silly, but I wanted to sort of be imaginative and think about like what accents would look fun on something like this, because I honestly don't know. I just figured there was a lot of variety in the land ships at the time and the organization of them, so I think that's kind of a fun thing. But yeah, so as you can see, it all fits sort of weird long ways pinned down to the front of this thing, and the engine is actually accessible. And in just a minute here, I will make flaps for it too, because it has sort of like hood engine pieces that pop open, and I end up putting those on pretty soon. But it's fun. It looks sort of like an engine, and it adds sort of a level of immersion. They're a little tricky to open, but it's cool. But how that peak came out, where it's more of a sharp peak on the very hood of that thing from those pin blocks together, just looks great. It's so much fun for me to be able to try to come up with fun ways to make this kind of stuff happen, and it's really just my delight of being a Lego builder in general. These are the hood doors for closing the engine down. I saw some variations that had different longer doors with handles on them or whatever. This was kind of the best method I found. I might change them because they're actually hard for me to open up because they're so smooth. But I think they're okay for right now. They are not the same exact shape, but they're pretty close, and it adds some detail and some fun replayability in this, but it does ultimately look like the front of the tank, which was really cool. These right here are the exhaust pipes. Like I said, this video will be mostly just details and little bits and pieces of how sort of the accents, which is funny. Again, for people who were like, oh yeah, it's pretty cool for the very first video, it really didn't look like much in the first video in my opinion, but it's gonna look a lot better here pretty fast. I also left lots of hooks and stuff, as you'll see later as I do the walls on the outside of it for being able to haul and carry stuff, which is one of my favorite things to add to vehicles like this. So I tried to add extra pieces and some studs and stuff too that I could have ultimately made smooth, but I left some intentional ones so that I could stack some things on it, but it didn't look too weird. But for the most part, it's smooth, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it came together really well. It was definitely a tricky build for sure. It was clever things like that hood that I made that I was just really happy with and excited to share, because it's such a delight of mine to build like that and to share that and hopefully inspire other builders too, because I see stuff like this all the time watching other people, or because I've explained this a bit before, but as a viewer I love to watch these things, so it's fun to share and be sort of on the making side of it and think that maybe I could inspire people, or for people to be like, oh yeah, that's a pretty cool thing. I think that's a fun thing to be able to share. I did kind of some random color bricks on the inside to kind of fill in some space. As you can see, there's an orange one in the back there for this front piece. And it's just because I didn't want to waste any extra gray that I had to use. At the same time, it kind of keeps it easy to sort of distinguish from where the pieces are, and it's easier to watch kind of something assembled if it has colored pieces in the back too. This front bit, this is the very front of the tank. It originally was too small. I had to work pretty hard to shape it out the right way. And it ended up being 5 studs long like the body. I had one that was 4 studs long originally, and it fit nicer in the front, but it didn't look the right size. So I worked pretty hard to make one that was a lot more appropriate to the size of the vehicle, which is cool. I think the result is something that I'm proud of. And I don't say this as often as I should, but with most of the things that I make and feature on my YouTube channel, I might go back and change. If there are anything drastic, I might make videos on them, but for the most part, I appreciate the freedom, and at least in some of the historical things that I make, to try to make different variation, different clever sort of methods to do things differently. Because historically, there were also variations of these vehicles, not only in color patterns, but in shape and like purpose and stuff too. I saw a picture once, a real picture that was a Renault FT17 tank that did not have any guns on it. It was modified to carry a telephone pole. And I thought that would be so cool to make a tank that didn't even have a gun on it, and made a telephone pole tank, like a field telephone station on the body of a Renault FT17. And I thought, oh, that would be so much fun to do. And I like trying to find weird stuff like that and sort of apply that. So yeah, I'm building the sides here. It came together real cleverly. I hope that that's recognized. Again, I sound entitled when I say that, but I just have such an appreciation for smart builds and the things that I come around to work on. I ended up using sort of that stick shift piece right there for I think they were Hotchkiss machine guns maybe, on the outside of this tank, and I didn't originally plan to do that. I don't like just putting like sort of little stems on there and being like, okay, it's a gun, you know. I like to try to use Technic pins and things and make sort of like barrels and try to make things that look exactly like guns, because I don't really have any fancy gun pieces. I try to use pieces that are fairly normal, so that if people want to build these things, they actually can, and they can, you know, kind of do it themselves, and it doesn't require a whole bunch of, you know, fancy print pieces or stuff that also is like, you know, things that aren't even Lego. I try to inspire sort of creative building with really normal pieces for the most part. So back to the those gear shift pieces, or those little levers, I personally didn't like them as a choice, so I kind of omitted them for a while, and I made a different gun that was made out of a sort of a Technic pole and another sort of a wand piece, and I had mixed feelings about it. So I might show that later. I think I'm gonna have to make a part 3 on this tank, which will be kind of cool, but I think that'll be the last part. But I'm gonna have to show that later, so I might show that example of my first gun idea. This is the gun I ultimately landed on, because that base of it looks sort of like that spherical like rotator piece that the machine gun actually fit into on the real tank was too good to pass up. It looks a lot like the actual the connector for the machine gun. So I gave up having a fancy barrel for having a fancy base. So I don't know. I think it's okay. That's like I said before, though, like that's the deal with my builds, though, is I might go back and change them and make some modifications, which I'm so glad that Lego like warrants that too, allows that to happen, because I've done a little bit of model building too, and model building is not necessarily like that. You kind of have to have a specific thing, and it's a little bit like that, but not as much as Lego. So I might change them. I might also show the other variation of guns that I kind of liked for different reasons in my part 3. But maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm still figuring it out. This connection was too beautiful, though. It just all fit together exactly as it should, because that side of that tank is smooth. And I left some hooks on there for tools and stuff too. But the yeah, those sort of ball lever pieces just look a lot like the gun, so I had to include them. They're at least the ones that I have on this this variation of it, but I might change it, as I mentioned before. This is the build of like sort of the main tower. That's kind of the front point with the first machine gun on the very front, and I think it just looks a lot like it's supposed to, and that's such a cool thing for me, at least, to come around to a build that looks a lot like the actual thing. So naturally I looked at a lot of pictures and I tried to find pieces coordinated to that. I kind of started with a solid build and so hollowed it out on the inside so that a minifigure could be in, which is pretty cool. But it came with some complex building techniques. So here it is again, more of that half pin technique, to get a double stud on something, which I think is fun. I would encourage people to try it. It's a fantastic use of that piece, because it makes sort of a curve around, and I do it lots on this build. If you look for it, you'll definitely see it. And yeah, the yellow is just there to kind of fill up some space and not try to use up any more of the gray pieces that I already have to. But yeah, it's got some fun techniques. Had a little bit of a wrecked Lego there. I try to use the wrecked Legos if I can manage, if they're still usable, so that I don't have to use good ones, and if the bent ones still kind of do what they need to do. I try to be nice to my Legos, but stuff happens every once in a while. And here's that other front gun. But it's really cool. For people who actually know this tank, that's kind of the people that I'm making this video for in general, people who appreciate history or Lego in general. But for people who know this tank, I think that it will satisfy a lot of those people, because it looks a lot like the tank that I tried to build, and that's again something that I really enjoy, and I would hope that viewers could enjoy that as well. Maybe people who understand the purpose of this tank and what it looked like and what it was supposed to look like. And then if you understand Lego too, it's a new degree of like appreciating the build techniques too. So, but I don't necessarily make these things for anyone's approval. I'd make these things anyway, and I only just decided to kind of share them on YouTube and show people like how I like to build personally. But it doesn't really matter. I'm not really looking for anyone's approval, and I do this anyway. I just am kind of inspired recently to share. And I don't really know anything about YouTube. I'm not trying to do it as a business. I just kind of do it for fun and to share this stuff, because it's so inspiring for me to see things like this, and it'd be cool to inspire other people. But that's really it. It's not much more complex than that. So if people don't really watch my stuff, if they don't really share it or have any interest in liking or making any comments or anything, it's like it really doesn't matter to me. I don't have any problem with that. And that's not even supposed to be like some smart marketing ploy or anything. It's like, it's not a big deal. So merely if people come and watch my stuff and they're like, had a good time, then that's cool. That's no big deal. These walls were complex. I used sort of a backwards hinge here to connect onto. It was the best shape that I had personally. But it did leave some exposed studs on the very, very outside of that, which I think it's okay. It's all right. But yeah, this is part 3. Not part 3. This is part 2. Part 3 will be coming soon. Yeah, I'm gonna be working on that. So look forward to that. But this is part 2, and it looks a lot more like the Whippet, which I think is just really, really cool. So thanks for coming and checking it out.